Girls. Welcome to another episode of the Preacher Girl podcast. I'm Pastor Sharo. It's so good to be with you today for a very different kind of podcast. You know, over the past 25 years of pastoring, a lot of people ask me a lot of questions, especially you girls, about what it is like to be a pastor. Most people, all they see is, they see you on Sunday morning standing on the pulpit and preaching the gospel, or maybe in a conference somewhere, and people really only get to see you for about an hour, and that's all they know of you. And what they don't know is what happens behind the scenes. So this particular episode is for those of you who ever wondered what breaks your heart about being a pastor, and also for those of you who maybe want to be pastors or want to be preachers in your future, in your ministry. I want to give you some inside information and some scoop about some of the things that really make this job a pretty difficult one. So this is Confessions of a Female Pastor. So growing up in a preacher's house was difficult enough because, as you guys have probably always heard the adage that PKs are the worst, that preachers' kids, especially the girls, are worse than, every other kid. And people are quick to say that. You ever wondered if that was true or not? And if so, why? Well, personally, I'm a preacher's kid. And I'm telling you, it's not the same. Being a preacher's kid is so different from being a kid in any other house. Because if you think your parents were hard on you, you should have a preacher for a daddy. For this reason, one of two things will happen. One, your dad will be extra lenient and your mom will be extra lenient to make sure that they compensate for all the pressures that people put on you. Or two, they'll be extra strict. You can't go anywhere, you can't do anything, you can't do all the stuff that your friends are doing while you're a teenager. And if you do, sneak off and do something, be sure a church member who doesn't even come anymore will find you and go tell your parents all about it. So those were some of the challenges I had growing up in a preacher's household. And so the first thing I need you to know that breaks your heart as a preacher is that, number one, your family is in everybody's radar. Your family is on everyone's radar. People who don't take care to see where their own kids are going are going to be looking at your kids, and they will be the first to come back and tell you what's happening with your own kids. So back when I was in high school, I remember when we all went to a youth conference, my entire church. And the teenagers, of course, we all hung out together, and it was a youth conference anyway, so everyone came in vans and stuff, and I went with my dad, and after service, everybody was chatting and talking, and I think I might have spoken to a boy maybe for 5 minutes, and did nothing inappropriate at any point, didn't touch anybody, didn't do anything like that. By the time I got home, the rumor had spread and reached my dad that I was in the back seat of the car with some guy. And there are people from church that told him that, and I tried to tell him, absolutely not, I didn't do that. Maybe somebody was, but it wasn't me. And maybe two other people were, but it certainly wasn't me. And I think he believed me, but the mere fact that I put myself in a position where people could spread that kind of rumor about me really angered my father. But that was not an isolated incident. Things like that happened to me all the time, where I didn't do what people were saying I did, but they were so busy calling my mom and dad to tell them that's what I was doing. It was a constant, I want to cry just thinking about it, struggle to let them know that my relationship with Christ wasn't because people were watching me. It was because I love Jesus. And so I want you to know that if you're going to be a pastor and if you're going to be a preacher, you just be prepared to put your family on display. Satan paints a target on their backs for the rest of their lives, that they're always going to be the brunt of somebody's conversation. People will have you for dinner all the time, except you won't be invited. You'll be on the menu. And your children will face the same kind of ridicule that you face as a pastor. So if you know you can't handle that, And if you're the mama bear that will kill somebody and rip their head off if they say something about your kid, this is probably not the best job for you. You know, my mother's a very gentle woman, but there were times when I know she couldn't beat somebody to death for saying something about us. So she would get on her knees and pray them out of existence. And I laugh about that, but it's so hurtful. It's still, I'm 45 and it still breaks my heart today, even as a pastor, to know that my own family comes under that kind of scrutiny from people who don't think twice and would never want the same things to happen to their own kids. You know, people tell me all the time, Pastor, why do you care so much about what people think? You should just, flick them away and just ignore them. But the thing is, when people's souls depend on what you do and what you say, then you have to think really 3 and 4 times about everything you say and everything you do. Which leads me to the second most heartbreaking thing to me about being a preacher and being a pastor. And it's that the people that you seem to invest in the most are always in the position to hurt you the most. And so over the past 20 years, I've seen it happen over and over. I've seen it happen to my dad, my godmother. I've seen it happen to myself, my husband, my brothers. You know, the people that you take the time to pour into, to invest in, whether it be financially or spiritually or just spend time with, invite them into your home or invite them into your life or share yourself with them. Every time you dare to open up a little bit, to somebody and say, you're my family, you're just not a member of my church or just not a member of my friend, you're just not a friend, that person gets into your soul space. And what God meant to be good, the enemy always finds an opportunity to use that as a weapon. And so, this has happened so many times, which makes pastors put up walls where we don't let people into our lives very easily. My husband has a very hard time with that. He does not have a lot of friends on purpose, because when you have friends, they're in such a position to wound you. And sometimes it's easy to shut yourself down and to say, nobody can enter my safe space and stuff like that. But then you think about Jesus, because the whole time, Judas is in the group and Judas is going to betray him to death. The whole time Simon Peter is in the group and he's going to deny him. The whole time John is laying his head on Jesus' chest and John's going to run away from him when he needs him the most. And Jesus loved them even though he knew fully well that they were going to do that. As a human, I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know if the people who say, Pastor, we'll never leave, will actually ever leave. In fact, I kind of know that nobody's going to be there forever. And, when you're in the middle of those kinds of relationships with friends or with kids that you invest in a lot, and you say things like, when we're 60 and when we're 70, we're going to do such and such. And then just a few years down the road, there are no conversations between you. You don't see them. They don't like you. You don't like them. And then you're 45, you wander. So that's why I tell people in my church, I say, don't ever say you're going to be there forever. And that's not bitterness, That's just saying, whenever you say things like that to us, you kind of open the door for the enemy to come and prove you wrong. And that breaks my heart because as a pastor, you love people. You do. A real one anyway. You love people and then you let them into your life and then you watch them go over and over and over. And that breaks my heart. When you have a secular job and people leave you, you know what you lose? You lose an account, or you lose money, or you lose a client. But when you are a pastor and people leave you, you lose family, you lose brethren, you lose people who you loved and you cared for. And so that's, to me, the second thing that's really difficult, that the more you invest in somebody, then the more it hurts you when they desert you. And I can't give any examples because, one, there are too many, and those, I wouldn't even know which one to start with. So just be sure that if you are pastoring, that you were called to do this, because when Christ went to Calvary, he went all by himself. And even though he had thousands of followers at some point, and on that day when I'm sure he could have used a friend, nobody was there. And the one person who should have been there denied him. So I get how heartbreaking that would have been for him to an extent. I get that if you're going through hell, but somebody's there with you, it makes it a little bit easier. But it's tough stuff. It's tough stuff. And the easiest way to do this as a pastor is to just not care. To say, you know what, I'll come and I'll preach on a Sunday morning, and then that's it. The rest is up to you. But people do not permit you to do that. You see, people don't want pastors in their business, but they want to call you when they're sick, and they want to call you when, bad news hits or when they need a miracle. So you can be in their business as long as they let you. And it feels very, very akin to feeling very used. So that's the second heartbreaking thing about being a pastor. This was a dumb idea. Did I say that? Yeah, it's super dumb. It feels so weird to number these because they're in no particular order, but you know what else is heartbreaking? When you fall from a pedestal that you didn't climb up on. People come into the church and they expect that if you're a pastor, then you're perfect. And so they put you on a pedestal, and then when you don't live up to their expectations, or you do something that disappoints them, or you do something that they don't think you should have done, then you come tumbling down, and it's as if you did it to yourself. When the fact of the matter is, we say from the get-go, you won't find perfect people here. I'm not perfect. I have never been perfect. No man on earth except Jesus Christ ever is and ever will be perfect. So people are the ones who put pastors and, preachers up on a level that no human should be put on. So the day that you let people down, which, by the way, every single one of us, pastors included, will do at some point, let somebody down, I'm telling you, the crash is hard. The fall is painful. And then people say, well, he or she did that to themselves. But the thing is, we never climbed up there. We never said, worship us or expect perfection. We never said any of those things, because at best, this is a journey that we're on together. This is an experience where we learn together and we get to guide you. And yes, we are held to a higher standard and we're expected to live at a deeper level in Christ, and we don't want to publicly let people down, but pastors almost do not have permission to be human. And so you come crashing face first at the first sign of disappointment, at the first sign of imperfection, at the first sign of failure or fallibility. If you say anything that's remotely unkind or unlike the Bible, let me give you an example. Many years ago, it was probably like 20 years ago, there was a song called "Does He Still Feel the Nails?" And this song says, "Does he still feel the nails every time I fail? Does he hear the crowd cry, 'Crucify again'? Am I causing him pain? Then I know I've got to change, because I just can't bear the thought of hurting him." As a young person, every time I heard that song, I just cried and cried, because the thought of hurting Jesus over and over and crucifying Christ afresh would rip me apart. So as a youth pastor, I taught that lesson. And I said, When you sin, you crucify Christ afresh. Now, that was biblically inaccurate because that's not what the Bible says. We do crucify Jesus afresh when we turn away from him, when we reject salvation, when we've tasted and been saved and seen that the Lord is good, and then go back to our old lifestyle. It's like crucifying him afresh, but he was crucified once and will never be crucified again. So theologically, my argument was unsound, but my heart was so in the right place because all I wanted was to wreck them. I wanted to wreck them for Jesus like I was wrecked. It does not justify what I said, but somebody came up to me afterwards and said something to the effect that that is wrong. And so I've always said, I'm open to your argument and I'd love to hear what you have to say. And he proceeded to tell me that I was teaching a false doctrine and leading kids astray, and I was immoral as a teacher, things like that. And none of that was called for. And so at the end of that conversation, I admitted, that really was an error. And I will rectify that. Yes, my kids repented. Yes, they were bawling their eyes out and having encounters with Jesus. But I am very willing at all times to say, I taught that the wrong way. And my ideas have changed about many theological issues over the years. But just the way that it was said made me so afraid to teach anything. For a long time, I was second guessing myself. I was thinking, if I say this, is somebody going to attack me? And that's something as a pastor you're going to face all the time. You're going to teach eschatology, then if you don't know everything, you will have somebody coming up to you and say, well, is what you're saying sound or not? Every time I have a parade or do something Christmassy, I have a barrage of people that will come to me about how Christmas is pagan. I get it every Christmas, every Easter. I get it every time we celebrate a birthday. The mere fact that I call Jesus God raises so many oppositions in the faith and in the Christian circles, that if you don't have a strong back and if you don't have a good resolve and a firm foundation in who Christ is in your life, you are going to be exhausted, humiliated, and you're going to get burned out really, really, really fast. And that's the third thing, the third most heartbreaking thing about being a pastor. Number four is very specific to you preacher girls. Right? Because I don't think preacher men, that's Pastor J. I don't think preacher men have the same issue that I'm going to talk to you about right now. Preaching is a man's job. And that's according to traditional teaching in some ways, many sects of Christianity, the Baptists, for instance, they maintain that women should not preach at all. And they cite scripture from the epistles from Paul, which says that a woman ought to learn in silence. And a lot of scripture is taken out of context and it's not read in the way that it was meant to be written. They completely forego that in the first verse of that book, Paul said that we all ought to prophesy. And what they don't realize as well is in that those days, the Hebrew women weren't even taught the Bible. They weren't taught the scriptures. They were not allowed to learn the Torah. So the mere fact that Paul was saying a woman ought to learn in silence was opening a door for women that didn't even exist to that church at that time. And there are a million reasons why that women have permission to preach the gospel. The mere fact that, the Old Testament has people like Deborah, who was a prophetess, and Anna, who was in the temple, and Priscilla, Aquila, and over and over. Yesterday I preached about Dorcas and Tabitha, who was Dorcas. And the first woman who ever preached the resurrected Christ was Mary. There are a million reasons why we know that a woman can absolutely preach this gospel. But unless you are willing to fight for your right to preach Jesus, then you're going to have a lot of issues with people who send you emails, with people who won't come to your church, people who get saved under your ministry and then leave to go listen to a man preach the gospel because somebody told them a woman ought not to preach. And this is what I say. I say that Jesus would use a donkey to get his message across, and he would absolutely use a woman to get his message across. So if you're a preacher girl, one of the most heartbreaking things about being a preacher or a pastor is the amount of people that will not hear what you have to say because of your gender, because you're female. But this is what I've always maintained, that if God called you, no one can uncall you. That's why it's so important as a pastor to know that your calling is from God. You're not doing this for an audience. You're not doing this for a congregation, and most certainly not for an offering. You're not doing this to be popular. You know what? Be a YouTuber. It's easier. Be an Instagrammer. Way easier. Become an influencer. Pastoring is different. The word pastor means to shepherd. And unless you know how to shepherd people, unless you know and have a heart for people who will turn around and bite you on the ankle, then you probably don't need to be pastoring, especially as a female. It always, always helps if you're a female to have a husband who supports your vision, who supports the call of God in your life. Because I don't care what aspect of ministry you're in, if your spouse does not support your calling, it's going to be so impossible. Notice I didn't say difficult. It's going to be impossible. Because as a woman, because the scripture says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands, to submit to somebody who does not believe that you're called to do what you're called to do and that this is a God man, it's going to be hell on earth for you. So that's why it is so important that you don't be unequally yoked in the first place. Don't marry somebody. Don't be involved in a relationship with somebody who does not trust God's calling on your own life and who's calling in their life from God. That you want to trust somebody that God has called them and God has called you to two different places, to two different aspects of ministry, maybe in the same place, if that makes sense. So if two people are vying for one pulpit, that's going to cause not only anxiety and animosity, and if some people like how she preaches and some people like how he preaches, then it's going to cause a rift in a marriage that doesn't even need to be there. So you need to be in a relationship with somebody who you're equally yoked with, where their calling is just as important as your calling is, so they can support you and you can support them and you both can support Christ. But that's hard. It's hard. I face it every single week of my life. People send me YouTube links and send me videos and say, how dare you preach the gospel? I've been condemned to everything, including hell, Hades, and everything in between, for telling people that Jesus saves. But you know what? I'm going to tell them anyway. I'm going to tell them because you know what I believe? I believe that you don't need a pulpit to preach a message. That is in the depths of my heart. And if one day this pulpit no longer is mine, if one day I don't get this stage, if one day I'm instructed by the Lord to leave it and to move on to something else, will I stop preaching? No. I maybe will not be preaching behind a pulpit, but I'll always have a different pulpit, because as long as there's breath in this body, then it's going to tell somebody that Jesus saves. Before I go into the next heartbreaking thing about being a pastor, and the list is long, I'll just give you maybe one or two more. I do want to tell you that the highs outweigh the lows. Not every pastor I know has said this. In fact, I know one pastor that always said from the beginning, he said, if I could do anything else except this, I would. And I used to always think, why are you killing yourself? Why are you doing this? And I love pastoring. Ups, downs, and we've had some hard times. We still have hard times. I sit with my brothers and my dad sometimes and I think, why are we so crazy? Because we can all afford to, we're all smart enough to do other things. We've all been in the secular world and made really, really good incomes. But here we are full-time in this ministry for people to kick us around, And I think to myself, and we talk about it all the time, that if Jesus didn't call us, we so wouldn't do this. But the fact that he has put us in this, just a few weeks ago, I was talking to my dad and he said, I love the kingdom. I love being a pastor. And if you knew some of the things that man has had to go through in 40 years of ministry, you would think he was stark raving mad to say he loves this. He said, I enjoy this. And I said to him, I enjoy this too. I really do. I love what I do, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. And as long as the Lord lets me, I'm going to do this. So I need you to know that if you're called, this is not to scare you. This is to let you know that it's not a joke. And people think that your whole job is 1 hour on a Sunday. You have no idea that you don't get rest days when you're a pastor. You don't get, days off. And when you do take a vacation, people want to know where you got the money to spend to buy the tickets. Which leads me to the next most heartbreaking thing about being a pastor. People expect the most unreasonable things from you. It's crazy. One, they expect you to be poor. And people are very offended if you're a pastor who has anything. They want you to drive the oldest car, to wear the oldest clothes, to live in the oldest house while they work and get all the things that people want in life. But you're not allowed to have those things, because if you do, then you're materialistic. If other people do, they're ambitious. And that makes no sense to me. Up to this day, my husband and I have not had a reason to collect a salary from our church. But I always tell my church, and I maintain it from day one, if I ever feel the need to do that, then I will have no qualms about doing that. Because the Bible says a workman is worthy of their hire. But I'm telling you, you will never find a more offended people than people who see a pastor with a new car. When new people come to your church and it's offering time, right? They're going to put $1 in the offering, but they will say more often than not, you see, all the church wants is money. And what I want to say is, how does your $1 ever affect the bottom line of a church? It doesn't. It doesn't. And to expect your pastor to live in poverty, for his kids to never have a new pair of shoes, trust me, we lived it. We know it. While everybody else's kids had everything, we get hand-me-downs on old shoes our whole life. We don't have running water. We don't have a phone, but everybody else is allowed. And the minute a pastor gets something, oh, well, where did they get the money to buy that? It's hard. It's hard to recognize that the people who are supposed to love you have very unreasonable and unrealistic expectations of your life. Because a lot of people think that pastors pastor because they can't do anything else. And maybe there are some that do that, and some pastor for their green card. But some of the most brilliant people on this planet are pastors. They preach the gospel because they're called to do it. When God was picking, he picked the smartest people. Not every pastor is a dummy. And yes, there are some out there that I wonder, but more often than not, these men and women of God they have laid down their lives and laid down their livelihoods and laid down great salaries in great companies to do this, because that's what we're called to do. Another unreasonable expectation of pastors is that we need to be boring. People get really offended that I do TikTok videos, Instagram videos, and I make a fool of myself pretty much on a regular basis. People don't understand why. If I'm a pastor, I want to have fun too, and I want to make people laugh, and I like to hang around with people that have some life in their bones. People don't understand why I make such a big deal out of birthdays, that Christmas means so much to me, and any church should have anything like a 40-foot ice cream sundae. None of that is scriptural. If other people did it for their friends and family, nobody would have a problem with it. But when a pastor does it, then it borders on sacrilegious. And that's unreasonable, because pastors are people. And we shepherd people, not robots. We shepherd people, not old-timey saints. You understand? Not everybody we shepherd is in a monk suit and living in Tibet. Okay, nobody I shepherd is like that. But you get what I'm saying. And one of the reasons why, especially people after Generation X are leaving churches, is because there is nothing there. They encounter God in other places. In the church, you get your 4 songs and a sermon. And why? You can do that online. So when pastors who still have some life in their bones want to have some good times in your church and say, let's have casual Sunday, you're going to have every suit and tie on the planet jumping down your throats about, wait, this sounds like a rant, doesn't it? This is my story. This is my perspective. This does not apply to any other preacher or pastor out there. I'm just giving it to you from the way I feel about it. And sometimes it takes a push from me to not be normal, to just be who I am. It takes a push for me to say, I don't need to be Furtick. And I don't need to be Jakes. None of the Jakeses. I just need to be Sharo. Because when God picked me to pastor this church, He wanted my very unique blend of quirkiness as the pastor here. So if you're going to be a pastor, then it does not mean abandoning your personality. It just means abandoning yourself. I'm going to give you one more heartbreaking thing to me. This is a personal thing too about being a pastor. And it is that people don't remember what you say. You have no idea how frustrating it is to labor, to research, to sweat, to get diarrhea, because you're so stressed out to get the word. I mean, I know some people just, plagiarize or off of YouTube. I don't do that. I labor over the word. And I spend a lot of time trying to study and bring it here to dish it out to my people. And then next Wednesday, when I ask, nobody remembers. And all of a sudden, I'm telling my husband, I'm like, why do we waste our time? Nobody gets it. Nobody hears it. It's why I love Hope NYC. Seriously. Because even if they don't remember en masse, there are always 2 or 3 people who shouting out the answer. Sometimes wrong, but it doesn't matter. They're trying. No, but it is heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. Any teacher, any parent who drills something into their kid only to have them forget it, like how to use the potty or whatever, it's a little heartbreaking. Well, as a pastor, you face that stuff every Sunday. And if you're like me or my brother Jason or Jude, we put too much stuff in our sermons anyway. Humans can only remember three bits of facts at a time. And we just load it up. Me, I'm throwing 50 darts on one must stick. But it's heartbreaking sometimes when, you preach first fruits, or you preach principles of reciprocity or forgiveness, and only to have them confront you with the same issue in a week and the same problem, and that could be a little heartbreaking. That could be a little bit heartbreaking. But of all of those things that I've mentioned, and trust me, I have 50 more where that came from, including you're not supposed to wear makeup, and preachers can't preach in pants. Just don't even let me get started. But the most difficult thing to face as a pastor is when people backslide. Because even though it's their life choice, it doesn't just feel like you failed. It feels like you failed God. I know everybody doesn't feel that way, and I don't have to give an answer for them. But every time I see somebody on Facebook, or they cross my mind, and I know they used to be sitting in these chairs, and they used to be singing here or dancing here or picking up the offering, or I remember the day when they lifted their hand. And then I see them, just running so far away from God. It's just a reminder over and over and over and over again. It feels like you fail over and over and over. And failing people is one thing, but failing God, and I know we don't, But I'm telling you, from a personal point of view, I always go back and say, God, if that was me, if I did or said anything that gave them an excuse, because I can't be their reason, but if I did or said anything that gave them an excuse to walk away from you, forgive me for that. And that is a really, really heavy burden to carry. You know, once, the only time I've ever had to bury a teenager, I remember driving home and thinking, Lord, was there anything I could have said or anything I could have done? Because this kid was 18 and he played drums in my band, and I took him to Trinidad with the team. He was never absent from church. And after his funeral, I remember just crying my eyes out and thinking, you know, to backslide is one thing, but to die, and for him to die without me knowing whether or not his relationship with Jesus was even real, I don't think you ever properly recover from things like that. And Jesus heals it. And every time, you know, somebody gets saved, it's like, really, it's like giving birth all over again. I can't explain it otherwise. It feels like that. But the next time your pastor gets up to preach on a Sunday morning, and they're standing behind that pulpit, looking all nice or all crappy, however they look, I don't know. Don't be so quick to judge what they're saying. Don't be so quick to be, you know, the Bible police. Understand that they have families too, that they have lives too, that they're human too, and that what they're doing is for Christ and for you. When you go to work, you don't work for anybody else but you and your family. But when they go to work for Christ and for all the people that are sitting in that congregation. They're working for you. They don't have to. They choose to. You know, and so all you girls out there, all you women out there who think that this is a glamorous job because you get to stand behind a pulpit with a mic in your hand, preacher girl stand with the mic, you know. Just know that's just the smallest part of what this job is. And there's so much more. There's so much more that's involved in it. You know, just keeping yourself accountable, not only morally and spiritually, but keeping yourself accountable to the people you teach by staying learned and educated. And it's a disservice to keep drawing from old wells. You really have to dig deeper every single time, learn more, be more, you know, spiritually equipped to equip the saints. It's a responsibility that you have, that in many jobs, once you learn it, you got it. In this one, you have to grow. You have to keep knowing. And the challenge is forever. The challenge is forever. As I wind this up, I just got to tell you that if I didn't grow up in my godmother's care, if I didn't watch her do this as a single woman with no children and literally no family for a long time, until she reconciled with her family properly. But if I didn't live that, I wouldn't be here today. Preacher Girl would not exist. Hope NYC would not exist. But God prepared me a long time ago by putting me in the house of a little lady who is the strongest woman I've ever met, who could do what 10 men could do all by herself, including build a structure to have church in. And he let me watch her get let down over and over and over, and betrayed and accused and forgotten and used and abused. And he saw me watch her pick herself up every single week and go back to work for the same people because she loved Jesus. So I know how to do this. I know I'm called to do this. But it doesn't mean that it's always an easy thing. It's always a good thing. I realize that Preacher Girl is a happy place to be. And I apologize if any of you found this a little too serious or a little too... You could just blame Shania and Fanny. And I don't even know how to end by just saying I love being a preacher. I love being a pastor. It's my favorite thing. I love being a woman. Seriously, I would never want to be a man. That sucks. I love being a lady. Seriously, and I identify that way. I identify as a girl. And but I just want to end by saying that I thank God for my church, and I thank God for the people I've met along the way, whether they hurt me or not. Every single one, they've been a part of who I am right now. And most of all, I thank God for my family, for my husband, and for my family, for my parents, for my miss, and for my siblings and my in-laws, because I don't know if I could do any of this without knowing that they're there. And if it ever gets too hard for me, I always can run home. That's it. If God called you, no one can uncall you. I don't know if you would, but if you like this podcast, this video blog, click the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up. I'm not accepting any criticism on this. God bless you. Bye.